The morning of September 3rd, 2023, started like any other Sunday at the Denver Mountain Zoo in Colorado. The sun rose over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that tourists would later describe as postcard perfect. Families were already lining up at the main gates, children clutching stuffed animals, and parents checking their phones for the day's schedule of keeper talks and feeding demonstrations. Security supervisor Marcus Webb made his routine morning sweep at 6:52 a.m., his boots crunching on gravel paths still wet with morning dew. He had worked at the zoo for 19 years and could walk the entire perimeter with his eyes closed. Everything was as it should be. The electronic locks showed green across all enclosures. The backup generators hummed their steady rhythm. The overnight incident log showed nothing more exciting than a raccoon trying to get into the trash compactor near the food court. Marcus took a sip of his coffee, bitter and too hot, and prepared for what he expected to be another peaceful Sunday. He had no way of knowing that in exactly 47 minutes, his voice would be the one screaming into every radio on the property, that his hands would be shaking so badly he could barely hold his weapon, and that what he was about to witness would make international news and force scientists around the world to reconsider everything they thought they knew about animal cognition and emotion. At 7:39 a.m., the impossible happened. Brutus was not supposed to be able to escape. The 450-kilogram African lion, aged 12, had lived in Enclosure 7 of the Big Cat Sanctuary since he was transferred from a facility in Texas 4 years earlier. His habitat was state-of-the-art, designed by the same architects who had consulted on exhibits for the San Diego Zoo and the Bronx Zoo. The walls were 18 feet high, reinforced concrete, topped with angled barriers, specifically engineered to prevent climbing. The gates were controlled by electronic locks with triple redundancy, each requiring a physical key, a numerical code, and a biometric scan to open. The moat surrounding the enclosure was 15 feet deep and 20 feet wide. In 4 years, Brutus had never shown the slightest interest in testing these boundaries. Keeper logs described him as calm, occasionally lethargic, generally disinterested in enrichment activities. He ate his meals, he slept in the shade, he ignored the tourists who gathered at the viewing windows. He was, by all accounts, a perfectly adjusted captive lion who had accepted his circumstances with the resignation typical of his species in modern zoos. But on the morning of September 3rd, something changed. Later analysis of security footage would show that Brutus began exhibiting unusual behavior at approximately 7:15 a.m. He started pacing the perimeter of his enclosure, not with the aimless back and forth of a stressed animal, but with purpose. He was testing the fence line, methodically checking each section. At 7:28 a.m., he found what he was looking for. The investigation that followed would reveal that a combination of factors, each individually insignificant, had created a perfect storm of vulnerability. A minor earthquake 3 weeks earlier, barely noticeable to humans, had created a hairline fracture in one section of the concrete wall. Thermal expansion and contraction over the unusually hot summer had widened that fracture by millimeters each day. Heavy rains the previous week had saturated the ground around the moat, softening the earth. And on the night of September 2nd, a maintenance worker named David Chen had noted in his log that the hydraulic system controlling the secondary gate was running slightly slow, probably needed fluid, would address Monday morning. None of these things alone would have been enough. But Brutus, with an intelligence and determination that would stun the experts who later studied the footage, exploited every single one. At 7:34 a.m., he began digging at the base of the weakened wall section. His massive paws, each the size of a dinner plate, excavated the softened earth with shocking efficiency. At 7:36 a.m., he used his 450 kilograms of weight to apply pressure to the fractured concrete, widening the crack. At 7:38 a.m., he squeezed his massive body through an opening that engineering consultants would later say should have been physically impossible for an animal his size to navigate. And at 7:39 a.m., Marcus Webb's radio exploded with the panicked voice of junior keeper Timothy Rodriguez. Code red, Brutus is out. He's out of the enclosure." The protocol for an escaped big cat was well established, and had been drilled dozens of times. Immediate lockdown of all public areas, evacuation of visitors to secure indoor facilities, deployment of the emergency response team with tranquilizer rifles, notification of local police and wildlife authorities. The entire sequence was designed to be executed in under 4 minutes. Marcus Webb initiated the protocol at 7:39:47 a.m., his training overriding the surge of adrenaline that made his hands shake. Sirens began wailing across the 80-acre facility, a sound that turned a peaceful Sunday morning into chaos. The public address system crackled to life, with a pre-recorded message delivered in a calm, professional female voice that somehow made the words even more terrifying. Attention all guests. This is an emergency announcement. Please proceed immediately to the nearest indoor facility and follow staff instructions. Do not panic. Do not run. Walk quickly and calmly. This is not a drill. Families who had been taking selfies in front of the flamingo exhibit suddenly found themselves being herded by staff members whose friendly smiles had been replaced by urgent efficiency. Children started crying. Parents grabbed strollers and hands and belongings, their vacation day transforming in seconds into something from their nightmares. And somewhere, in the maze of pathways and exhibits, 450 kilograms of apex predator was moving with purpose toward a destination that no one could have predicted. The emergency response team assembled near the administration building in less than 3 minutes. 6 trained personnel, each armed with a tranquilizer rifle loaded with enough ketamine-based sedative to drop an animal Brutus's size in approximately 4 to 6 minutes. They were led by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the zoo's head veterinarian, a woman with 22 years of experience and a reputation for unflappable calm in crisis situations. But even Dr. Mitchell felt her stomach clench with fear as she studied the security monitor showing Brutus's last known position. He wasn't behaving like an escaped animal. He wasn't exploring his newfound freedom or fleeing toward the perimeter. He was moving in a straight line, with absolute determination toward the northeast section of the zoo, toward the children's petting area. "Oh my God," Timothy Rodriguez whispered, his face going pale, as he traced Brutus's trajectory on the map. "There's a birthday party in the education pavilion. 30 kids aged 5 to 8. The birthday party of Emma Chen, who had just turned 7 years old that morning, had started at 7:30 a.m. Her parents had paid extra for the early time slot because Emma loved animals and wanted to be at the zoo the moment it opened. 30 children in matching purple birthday hats were gathered in the education pavilion, a partially open-air structure with a roof, but no walls, designed to give visiting school groups an immersive nature experience. They were meeting rabbits and guinea pigs and a very patient goat named Buttons. They were laughing and petting and taking photos. They had no idea that less than 300 meters away, a 450-kilogram lion was heading directly toward them. Marcus Webb was running now, his 54-year-old legs pumping harder than they had in a decade, his radio clutched in one hand and his sidearm in the other. He knew with absolute certainty that he would not be able to reach the education pavilion before Brutus did. The lion had a head start and moved faster than any human. But Marcus ran anyway, because 30 children were in danger, and he had taken an oath 19 years ago to protect every person on zoo property. He ran past the flamingos, their pink bodies a blur in his peripheral vision. He ran past the bear grotto, empty now because the bears had been secured in their indoor dens the moment the code red sounded. He ran past tourists pressed against the windows of the reptile house, their faces confused and frightened, and as he ran, his mind filled with images of what he might find when he arrived. He had seen what big cats could do. He had been present 6 years ago when a keeper made a mistake entering the tiger enclosure, had seen the aftermath of 3 seconds of attack. He knew exactly how much damage Brutus could inflict in the time it would take the response team to arrive and deploy sedatives. 30 children. Purple birthday hats. He ran faster. But something impossible was happening, something that would make Marcus Webb stop in his tracks 50 meters from the education pavilion, his weapon half raised, his mouth open in shock, something that would be captured on security cameras from 3 different angles, and later analyzed frame by frame by animal behaviorists who would struggle to explain what they were seeing. Brutus had reached the education pavilion. The massive lion, his golden coat, rippling with muscle, his mane full and dark, had walked right up to the edge of the open-air structure where 37-year-olds and 4 parent chaperones stood frozen in terror. But he wasn't attacking. He wasn't even in a predatory stance. He was sitting, just sitting, 10 feet from the nearest child, his tail wrapped around his body, his massive head tilted slightly to one side. And he was making a sound that none of the response team had ever heard him make in 4 years at the Denver Zoo. He was chuffing. It was a vocalization that big cats make as a greeting, a non-threatening sound that lions use with pride members they're friendly with, a sound of recognition and welcome. But Brutus was directing this sound at the group of children, more specifically at one child in particular, a small boy standing slightly apart from the others, wearing a purple birthday hat and a t-shirt with a lion on it. A boy with brown skin and dark eyes, approximately 7 years old, who was not screaming or crying like the others, who was instead staring at Brutus with an expression that Dr. Mitchell, arriving with her tranquilizer rifle raised, would later describe as recognition. The boy's name was Marcus. Not Marcus Webb, the security supervisor, but Marcus Thompson, aged 7 years and 3 months. He was Emma Chen's classmate and had been invited to her birthday party, even though they weren't particularly close friends, because Emma's mother believed in including every child in the class. Marcus Thompson was quiet, the kind of kid who sat in the back and didn't raise his hand much, who spent recess drawing pictures of animals instead of playing soccer. His teacher had noted in his file that he seemed to have difficulty connecting with other children, that he was bright but withdrawn, that he lived with his grandmother because of some family situation that the school didn't have details about. None of the adults at the birthday party knew Marcus Thompson's full story. They didn't know that 5 years earlier, when Marcus was 2 years old, he had been found by police in an apartment in Newark, New Jersey, alone with his mother's body. She had died of an overdose, and Marcus had been by himself for 3 days before neighbors reported the smell. They didn't know that he had been placed in foster care, had cycled through 4 different homes in 3 years, each placement failing because Marcus wouldn't speak, wouldn't connect, wouldn't respond to affection or discipline or any of the usual methods of reaching traumatized children. And they didn't know that 4 years ago, Marcus had finally been placed with his maternal grandmother, Dorothy Thompson, who had moved to Colorado for a fresh start, and who had loved her grandson with fierce determination despite his walls and his silence and his nightmares. But there was one thing that Dorothy Thompson had discovered about her grandson in their 4 years together. One thing that made him light up, made him smile, made him briefly forget whatever darkness lived behind his eyes. Marcus loved lions. He drew them constantly, filled notebook after notebook with crayon drawings of lion faces and lion families and lions in the wild. He watched documentaries about lions. He slept with a stuffed lion named King that was so worn from constant hugging that most of the fur had rubbed off. And 2 years ago, for his 5th birthday, Dorothy had scraped together enough money to take Marcus to the Denver Mountain Zoo for the first time. They had spent 6 hours there, but Marcus had wanted to stay at only one exhibit, the Big Cat Sanctuary. Enclosure 7, where a lion named Brutus lived. Dorothy had thought nothing of it at the time. Kids loved lions. It was normal. But Marcus had stood at that viewing window for nearly 3 hours, his small hand pressed against the glass, his eyes never leaving Brutus. And Dorothy had noticed something strange. Brutus, who according to the information placard, was usually disinterested in visitors, had come to the window, had sat down directly across from Marcus, separated only by 2 inches of reinforced glass, and the two of them, the traumatized boy and the captive lion, had stared at each other for so long that Dorothy had eventually had to physically pull Marcus away because the zoo was closing. They had come back the next week, and the week after that. For 2 years, every single Sunday, Dorothy had brought Marcus to the Denver Zoo, and every single Sunday Marcus had gone straight to Enclosure 7, and Brutus had come to meet him at the window. The zoo staff had started to notice. Keeper reports from the past 2 years noted the phenomenon. Brutus, typically lethargic and unresponsive, shows increased activity and interest when specific young male visitor is present. Sunday regular. Approximate age 5 to 7, African American, usually accompanied by elderly female, possibly grandmother. Lion approaches viewing window only for this visitor. Duration of interaction typically 1 to 2 hours. Behavior unusual but non-aggressive. One keeper, a young woman named Jessica Martinez, had even taken a photo 6 months ago. It showed Marcus with his hand on the glass and Brutus on the other side with his paw up, almost as if they were touching through the barrier. Jessica had posted it to the zoo's internal social media with the caption, "This kid must have a magic touch." Brutus actually seems to look forward to Sundays, but no one had connected the dots. No one had realized what was actually happening, that a bond had formed between a traumatized child and a captive lion, that every Sunday for 2 years they had been communicating in ways that transcended language and species, that Marcus Thompson, who barely spoke to humans, had found the one living being on Earth who understood his pain. Another captive, another creature ripped from where he belonged and placed in a world that didn't make sense. And now, on September 3rd, Marcus Thompson had come to Emma Chen's birthday party at the zoo, had been standing in the education pavilion, probably wondering if there would be time to visit Enclosure 7 before the party ended, and Brutus, somehow, some way that would baffle scientists, had known Marcus was there, had escaped specifically to reach him. Marcus, the security supervisor, shouted, and his voice was raw with fear and confusion. "Marcus, step away from the lions slowly, back toward me right now." But 7-year-old Marcus Thompson didn't move. He was staring at Brutus with tears running down his face, his small body shaking. And then, in a voice that most of his classmates had never heard him use because Marcus Thompson almost never spoke, he said 2 words that made everyone present understand that they were witnessing something far beyond a simple zoo escape. "He's sad," Marcus whispered. "He's sad like me." Dr. Mitchell had her rifle raised, her finger on the trigger, the safety off. At this range, she couldn't miss. The sedative would take 4 to 6 minutes to work, but the tranquilizer dart itself would startle Brutus, and a startled 450-kilogram predator could kill a child in seconds. Every protocol said shoot now, shoot immediately, don't wait. But something made her pause. Some instinct, some recognition of what she was seeing. Brutus hadn't moved, wasn't displaying any aggressive behavior, wasn't even looking at the other children. His entire focus was on Marcus Thompson, and the sound he was making, that chuffing vocalization, was growing more insistent. It wasn't a threat, it was a plea. Marcus Thompson took a step forward. The parent chaperones gasped. Emma Chen's mother screamed, "No!" Dr. Mitchell's finger tightened on the trigger, but Marcus took another step, and another. He walked right up to Brutus, this tiny 7-year-old boy in a purple birthday hat approaching 450 kilograms of apex predator. He stopped 3 feet away, so small compared to the lion that the size difference was almost comical. And then Marcus Thompson did something that made every adult present forget how to breathe. He took off his purple birthday hat and held it out to Brutus, like an offering, like a gift. "I know you're sad," Marcus said, and his voice was stronger now, clearer. "I'm sad too. I'm sad all the time since my mommy died. I think your mommy died too, didn't she? They took you away from where you belonged. They took me away too. I come visit you every Sunday because you're the only one. So who understands?" Brutus leaned forward slowly, carefully, and sniffed the purple hat. His massive head, larger than Marcus's entire torso, moved close enough to the boy that one snap of his jaws could have ended everything. The response team was positioned now, 6 rifles trained on the lion, 6 fingers on triggers. One word from Dr. Mitchell and Brutus would be hit with enough tranquilizer to drop an elephant. But she didn't give that word, because what happened next would be played on every news channel in the world, would go viral with over 500 million views, would be studied in psychology journals and animal behavior conferences and trauma therapy seminars. Brutus lay down. The massive lion, the escaped predator, the focus of a code-red emergency that had shut down an entire zoo, simply lay down in front of Marcus Thompson. He stretched out his front paws, lowered his enormous head to rest on them, and closed his eyes. It was a posture of complete submission, of trust, of vulnerability, the posture a lion takes only with pride members he feels completely safe with. And Marcus Thompson, this child who had been too traumatized to speak for 3 years, who had been abandoned by every system meant to protect him, who had learned before kindergarten that the world was a place of pain and loss, sat down next to Brutus. He put his small hand on the lion's mane, and he started to cry. Not the scared crying of a child in danger. The deep, shaking sobs of someone, releasing years of pain. "I miss her so much," Marcus wept into Brutus's fur. "I miss my mommy. She didn't mean to leave me. She was sick and she didn't mean to leave me alone. And I know you miss your family too. I know they took you away from where you belonged, and you've been so lonely. I'm so lonely too. I'm lonely all the time even though Grandma loves me. I'm lonely because nobody understands. But you understand, don't you? You understand what it's like when everything gets taken away." Brutus opened his eyes and did something that made Jessica Martinez drop her radio. He began grooming Marcus. His rough tongue, designed to strip meat from bone, began carefully licking the tears from Marcus's face with a gentleness that seemed impossible. It was the behavior a lioness uses to comfort her cubs, a behavior that big cats in captivity rarely direct toward humans. A behavior that indicated not just tolerance, but active care. Active love. Dorothy Thompson was 200 meters away, being held, back by zoo security as she screamed her grandson's name when she saw the live feed on Marcus Webb's tablet. She saw her Marcus sitting with that lion, crying, being comforted by an animal that should have been tearing him apart, and she understood. She understood that every Sunday for 2 years, while she sat on a bench reading her book, her traumatized grandson had been having therapy sessions with the only therapist who could reach him, a lion who understood captivity and loss and the pain, so of being ripped from everything familiar. Dorothy stopped struggling against the security guard holding her. She stared at the screen with tears running down her face. "Let them be," she whispered. "Please, just let them be together." For 47 minutes, the Denver Mountain Zoo remained in lockdown, while a 7-year-old boy and a 450-kilogram lion lay together in the education pavilion. The response team maintained their positions, rifles ready, but not firing. Dr. Mitchell kept her weapon trained on. Brutus put her finger off the trigger, and the world watched through security cameras as something unprecedented unfolded. Marcus talked. He talked more in those 47 minutes than he had in the previous 5 years combined. He told Brutus about his mother, about finding her body, about the nightmares he still had, about the foster homes where people were kind, but didn't understand why he couldn't connect, couldn't trust, couldn't believe that anyone would stay, about his grandmother, who loved him, but couldn't reach him, about how the only time he felt okay was on Sundays at the zoo, sitting at the window of Enclosure 7, feeling seen and understood by a creature who knew exactly what captivity felt like. And Brutus listened. The big lion stayed perfectly still, except for occasional rumbling vocalizations, except for continued gentle grooming, except for carefully adjusting his position a few times to keep Marcus supported against his warm bulk. At one point, Marcus fell asleep, his small body curled against Brutus's side, his hand still tangled in the lion's mane, and Brutus remained absolutely motionless, barely seeming to breathe, as if understanding that the child needed this rest, this moment of feeling completely safe for perhaps the first time in 5 years. Dr. Mitchell, who had tranquilized dozens of big cats in her career, who had dealt with aggressive animals and dangerous situations, found herself crying behind her rifle scope. "This isn't about instinct," she said, quietly to Marcus Webb, who stood beside her with his weapon holstered now, tears on his face. "This is love. Somehow, impossibly, this is love." The decision about how to end the situation was made by Dorothy Thompson, the grandmother who had fought through 4 years of silence and nightmares and trauma to reach her grandson, who had brought him to the zoo every single Sunday, rain or shine, who had loved him when he couldn't love himself. She insisted on being brought to the education pavilion. She walked slowly toward her grandson and the lion, and Brutus watched her approach but didn't move, didn't react aggressively, as if he recognized her as part of Marcus's pride. "Dorothy," a keeper said urgently, his hand on her arm. "This isn't safe. The lion could—" "The lion saved my grandson," Dorothy interrupted firmly. "That lion did what I couldn't do. He gave Marcus someone to connect with, someone who understood. I'm not afraid of him." She knelt down beside Marcus, who was just waking up, his eyes puffy from crying and sleep. "Time to go home, baby," she said softly. Marcus looked at his grandmother, then at Brutus, and fresh tears started flowing. "I don't want to leave him," Marcus whispered. "He's my friend. He's my only friend who understands." "I know, sweetheart," Dorothy said, her own voice breaking. "I know he is. But he has to go back to his home, and we have to go to ours." Brutus made a low sound in his chest, not a growl, but something almost mournful. His amber eyes met Dorothy's, and she would swear for the rest of her life that intelligence looked back at her. Understanding. Grief. "Can I come back?" Marcus asked, looking between his grandmother and the lion. "Can I still come see him on Sundays?" Dr. Mitchell stepped forward then, lowering her rifle completely. She looked at Marcus Webb, at the response team, at the circle of witnesses who had watched this impossible bond manifest. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of a decision that would probably violate a dozen zoo policies, but that she knew with absolute certainty was right. "Yes," she said, "Marcus, you can come back every Sunday, and we're going to make some changes to how you visit. No more glass between you. We're going to create a safe way for you and Brutus to be together, because what I just witnessed tells me that you two need each other." The extraction was careful and slow. Marcus stood up, and Brutus stood with him. The lion walked beside the boy all the way to the edge of the pavilion, matching his pace, occasionally pressing his massive head against Marcus's side, in what could only be described as affection. At the boundary, where zoo staff waited with a specialized transport cage, Marcus turned and threw his arms around Brutus's neck. "I love you," the boy whispered into golden fur. "Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being sad with me." Brutus rumbled deep in his chest, licked Marcus's face one more time, and then, with a cooperation that stunned everyone present, walked into the transport cage without resistance, as if he understood that this was necessary, that he'd done what he came to do, that he'd reached the child who needed him. The aftermath of September 3rd was complex and far-reaching. The zoo conducted a full investigation into the escape, implementing new security measures and protocols. David Chen, the maintenance worker, who had noted the slow hydraulic system, was not disciplined. The investigation found that his report had been proper, and that the failure was in the management's delayed response to a minor issue. Marcus Webb was commended for his handling of the crisis, though he privately told colleagues that he hadn't handled anything, that a lion and a little boy had taught him that sometimes the best response is to stand back and let something miraculous happen. But the most significant aftermath involved Marcus Thompson and Brutus. Dr. Mitchell, with support from the zoo director and after consultation with animal behavior experts from 3 major universities, implemented what they called the Brutus-Marcus Protocol. A specially designed interaction space was created adjacent to Enclosure 7. It had reinforced observation areas for safety personnel, but it also had an open section where, under controlled conditions with trained staff present, Marcus could spend time with Brutus without barriers. Every Sunday at 9 a.m., Dorothy Thompson brought her grandson to the zoo, and every Sunday Marcus spent 2 hours with Brutus. They sat together. Marcus talked, sometimes about his week, sometimes about his mother, sometimes about nothing in particular. Brutus listened and provided what one child psychologist who observed the sessions called a non-judgmental presence that allows Marcus to process trauma at his own pace in the company of a being who understands loss and captivity. The change in Marcus Thompson was documented by his teachers, his therapist, his grandmother. He started talking more at school, started making friends, started sleeping through the night without nightmares. His drawings of lions continued, but they became more detailed, more confident. He drew pictures of himself and Brutus, of his grandmother and Brutus, of his classroom and Brutus. The lion had become his anchor, his safe space, his proof that connection was possible even after devastating loss. And Brutus changed too. The keeper reports from after September 3rd noted increased activity levels, more engagement with enrichment, better appetite. The lion, who had been lethargic and disinterested, now showed clear excitement every Sunday morning. He would position himself at the gate to the interaction space, waiting, and when Marcus arrived, his entire body language would shift to what could only be called joy. Dr. James Richardson, an animal behaviorist from Berkeley who studied the case extensively, published a paper titled Interspecies Trauma Bonding, the Marcus Brutus Case Study. In it, he argued that both the child and the lion were experiencing similar psychological states related to captivity, loss, and disconnection from their natural social structures. Marcus had been removed from his mother and his home. Brutus had been removed from his pride and his savanna. Both were living in environments that provided physical care, but couldn't provide the specific type of connection they needed. And somehow, through the barrier of species and language, they had recognized that shared pain in each other and formed a bond that served as mutual healing. The story went global. News outlets from 60 countries covered it. The video footage, released by the zoo after careful consideration and with Dorothy's permission, was viewed over 500 million times. Psychologists and trauma specialists began citing the Marcus Brutus case as an example of how animals could serve as bridges to healing for severely traumatized children. Zoos and sanctuaries around the world began reconsidering their policies on animal-visitor interactions, asking whether the strict separation they maintained might be preventing potentially therapeutic connections. But for Marcus and Brutus, none of that mattered. What mattered was Sunday mornings. What mattered was the moment when a small boy would enter the interaction space and a massive lion would chuff in greeting. What mattered was the hour they spent lying in the sun together, Marcus talking or reading or just being silent, Brutus providing the steady, understanding presence that said you are not alone in your sadness, you are seen, you are understood, you are safe. On Marcus's 8th birthday, 1 year after the escape, the zoo threw a small party in the interaction space, just Dorothy, a few zoo staff, and Dr. Mitchell, and Brutus. Marcus blew out the candles on his cake, and when asked what he wished for, he didn't have to think. "I wished that everyone who is sad could have a friend like Brutus," he said. "Someone who understands what it's like when the world takes everything away. Someone who sits with you and doesn't try to fix it, just sits with you and is sad too until maybe it hurts a little less." 2 years after the escape, when Marcus was 9 and Brutus was 14, Dorothy received a call from Dr. Mitchell. The zoo had been contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell their story properly, not as a sensational escape story, but as a story about trauma and healing and the unexpected places we find connection. Dorothy discussed it with Marcus, and Marcus, who was now speaking confidently and had even joined his school's debate team, surprised her by saying yes. "I think other kids should know," he explained, "that when you're really sad and really scared, sometimes the thing that helps isn't a person. Sometimes it's something completely different, and that's okay." The documentary, titled The Lion and the Boy, A Story of Mutual Rescue, aired on PBS and won 3 Emmy Awards. It featured interviews with Marcus, with Dorothy, with Dr. Mitchell and the zoo staff who witnessed the escape. It included footage of Marcus and Brutus's Sunday sessions, showing the gentle giant lying peacefully while a child worked through trauma in his presence. But the most powerful moment of the documentary came at the end, when Marcus, now 9 years old and noticeably more confident and open than the silent child in the early footage, spoke directly to the camera. "Before I met Brutus," Marcus said, "I thought I was the only one who felt the way I did. I thought something was wrong with me because I couldn't stop being sad about my mum, because I couldn't connect with other kids, because everything felt wrong all the time. But then I found Brutus, and he was sad too. He was lonely too. And when we were together, I didn't feel so alone in my sadness. He taught me that it's okay to be sad about things that were taken from you. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to need time to heal. And sometimes healing doesn't look the way people expect it to. Sometimes it looks like a kid and a lion sitting together on Sunday mornings, just being sad together until the sadness gets smaller. The Marcus Brutus story became a touchstone in conversations about animal-assisted therapy, trauma treatment, and the emotional lives of animals. Dr. Richardson's research sparked a wave of new studies examining bonding between humans and large animals. Several zoos began experimental programs allowing supervised interaction between certain animals and children with specific therapeutic needs. And Marcus Thompson became a voice for childhood trauma awareness, speaking at conferences and schools about his experience. But through it all, the core remained the same. Every Sunday at 9 a.m., a boy and a lion spent time together. As Marcus grew older, approaching his teenage years, some people asked if he would outgrow his need for these sessions, if the bond would fade as Marcus healed and made human friends and moved forward with his life. But anyone who watched them together knew the answer. This wasn't about Marcus needing Brutus as a crutch or a temporary fix. This was about two beings who had found in each other a specific type of understanding that couldn't be replicated anywhere else. They were, in the truest sense, family. Each had rescued the other from an isolation that biology said shouldn't have been bridgeable, but that love had proven could be crossed. On a Sunday morning in June, 5 years after the escape, Marcus Thompson, now 12 years old and preparing to start middle school, sat in the interaction space with Brutus. The lion was 17 now, aging in the way that big cats do, moving a bit slower, sleeping a bit more. But his eyes were still clear and bright when Marcus arrived, and his greeting chuff was still filled with unmistakable joy. Marcus had brought his sketchbook, as he often did. He was working on a drawing for an art class assignment about someone who changed your life. The drawing showed a small boy standing at a glass window with a lion on the other side, their hands and paws pressed together through the barrier. "I'm drawing the first time we met," Marcus explained to Brutus, who was lying beside him with his massive head resting on the boy's lap. "Do you remember? I was 5. Grandma brought me here because I wasn't talking to anyone, and she thought maybe seeing animals would help. And you came right to the window. You looked at me like you could see everything I was feeling. Like you knew." Brutus rumbled, a sound that Marcus had learned to interpret over the years. This particular rumble meant contentment, comfort. "I'm here. I'm listening. You were the first one who made me feel like it was okay that I was broken," Marcus continued, his charcoal pencil moving across the paper. "Everyone else wanted to fix me. Therapists and teachers and even Grandma, even though she tried not to show it. But you didn't want to fix me. You were broken too, and you just wanted someone to be broken with, and somehow that helped more than all the fixing." His voice caught a little, and Brutus responded by lifting his head and pressing it against Marcus's chest, a gesture he'd made hundreds of times over the years, a gesture that said, "I'm here, you're safe, we understand each other." "Thank you," Marcus whispered into the golden mane, now streaked with grey. "Thank you for escaping that day. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for teaching me that sad people aren't alone, that sad lions aren't either, and that sometimes the best healing is just sitting together in the sadness until you're ready to feel something else." The story of how 450 kilograms of lion escaped the Denver Mountain Zoo and what he was looking for became legend. But for those who were there, for those who witnessed the moment when Brutus lay down in front of Marcus Thompson and chose gentleness over instinct, chose connection over everything his biology should have demanded, the story was about something much simpler and more profound. It was about recognition. About two souls separated by every imaginable barrier of species and circumstance, recognizing in each other the same grief, the same loneliness, the same desperate need to be understood. It was about how trauma creates a language of its own, and how sometimes the only translator we need is someone who speaks that language fluently, who doesn't try to teach us a different language, but simply sits with us and speaks the Words we need to hear. I understand. You are not alone. Your sadness is real and valid. And I will stay with you in this sadness for as long as you need. Brutus didn't escape because he wanted freedom. He escaped because he sensed that someone who understood him, someone who needed him, was nearby. And in that moment, the primal need for connection overrode every other instinct, every learned behavior, every barrier that humans had constructed. He found Marcus Thompson in that pavilion, and Marcus found him. And in finding each other, they both found a path through the darkness that neither could have walked alone. Years later, when Marcus Thompson graduated from high school with honors and a scholarship to study veterinary medicine with a focus on animal behavior therapy, he dedicated his graduation speech to Brutus. The speech went viral, just like the original footage had, and it ended with words that were shared millions of times across social media that were quoted in therapy sessions and support groups that were printed on t-shirts and posters. The words were simple. The words were true. Sometimes, Marcus said from the podium, his voice strong and clear, the thing that saves us doesn't look like we expect. It doesn't come from where we expect, and it doesn't heal us the way we expect. Sometimes it's a 450-kilogram lion who escapes from his enclosure and walks straight to a 7-year-old boy and says, "Without words, I see you. I know you. I am like you. And we are going to sit here together until the world makes sense again."